Hello and welcome to the UX Playbook. Today I'm joined by Steven Steiner and we'll be discussing why people management isn't the only route available that designers can take. Steven, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, man. I'm excited to be here. This is awesome. Kicking off the show for you. It's really fun.
Fantastic. Well, look, thanks very much for joining. So, I guess what would be great is if we can just get a very brief intro into your background and what's brought you here today.
Yeah, totally. So, to try to tell that, let's maybe tell the story backwards in the sense of where right now I'm a career coach for designers. And what I mean by that is I consider myself a designer by trade and a coach at heart. And that design by trade is basically built off of the fact that I built my career as a designer and I worked my way up to the corporate ladder where at a certain height I just didn't like it anymore. And I realized that what I loved doing was the aspect of coaching. And even my first job in high school was teaching some lessons at 15 and a half, and that has always stayed with me. So now what I do is take the skills that I've learned as a designer and use that to help other designers achieve their individual career aspirations.
It's really interesting. I've spoken to quite a few people in similar positions to you, but actually, I think this is why this topic was particularly interesting for us to discuss because there are a lot of designers and they get to a point in their career where they kind of have to choose a direction. The
Sure.
direction is either I'm going to go and become a leader or I'm going to remain as an individual contributor. And that's not always clear in terms of which way they should go. And it's not always clear as to maybe where their skills are going to be best placed. So, my understanding, looking at your background, you've held a number of IC roles, but also a number of leadership positions in different companies.
Yeah, it definitely yeah, exactly what you're saying in the sense of like once you get to a lead role as a designer, there's that fork in the road of being like, do I want to be a manager or do I want to keep building the craft to be more depth as a designer and realizing that it's like society tells us naturally to climb the corporate ladder and that's exactly what I did for a long time and then realized that it wasn't for me and instead of feeling stuck in that position and being like well I've already picked this path I guess I'm stuck here I went through my version of a career soul searching adventure and talked to a bunch of different people and really tried to listen to what felt natural for me and realized that leaving corporate America as the interim director role that I had felt like what I wanted to do and not necessarily what society's like, oh, you're here, you better keep going. It was like, yeah, this is right. And it's scary, but it's also a chance to do what I enjoy. And to me, that's way more fulfilling and satisfying.
So, when you were going through that journey, so obviously earning good salary, you've got a team underneath you, you're nurturing talent, you've got a lot of responsibility. So, what kind of questions were you asking yourself, and what was your decision making process when you were going through that soul searching?
Some of it sounds somewhat cliche, probably, but that idea of creating like a pros and cons list and having a pros and cons list around what things do I enjoy about my job, which were things like being able to help designers achieve what they wanted to do, improve the way that they told their story, help them advocate for stuff that they felt limited in achieving. Those are the parts of the job that I really liked. Looking at the stuff that I didn't like in a management role, you're not doing the craft as much as you are trying to advocate for headcount, trying to tell your leadership where your things are going, trying to defend your team when their product partners, other people might not agree with them for reasons that don't make sense. So that concept of like playing politics was on my cons list, where what I really liked was that part of like, let's figure out what you want to do and where you want to go. And figuring that out allowed me to then talk to a bunch of different coaches, consultants, and different people in my network that I've just respected for a long time to figure out like why what did they do and how did they do it and then how might I be able to lean into that more. And at a certain point it became clear that when you're coaching different clients or when you're working with different people in their career journeys, staying with their current employer might not be the best option for them.
Yeah.
However, when I was hired by a company somebody reporting to me was talking about their career journey, I felt like I had to speak the corporate language of being like, oh, we like you should work here, we can help you, versus that idea of being like, what do you really want to do? And is this really where you can do that?
So, in terms of like, what options did you feel were available to you at that point? So you had that fork. Well, actually, you were already leading a team. I think the thing that a lot of designers struggle with is when you get to a certain point within, say, the same company, you kind of get to almost a plateau. And so when you
Sure.
get to that plateau, a lot of the time, the only way to go is actually by team leading, because there's only so much you can do as being as an IC. So when you were looking at your options, what did you see as being viable options coming away from team leadership and moving into a different path?
So it obviously kind of depends on if you want to stay with your current employer, depends on the size of the company. And at the time, I was in a massive financial institution. So there were plenty of options if I wanted to keep trying to navigate that, if I felt like that was a place that I wanted to be. There's always the option of being like, hey, I like this, I just don't like it here. So where do you go somewhere else? Like if I wanted to stay down that management path and I'm just like, this isn't a place where I feel like I can be successful, it doesn't mean I couldn't potentially go get a management job somewhere else. And those conversations happened. In my head, though, it just never felt like something that I enjoyed doing. So why would I go do it somewhere else when the problem might not be the company? The problem is my own job satisfaction. And then once you're there, there's always a path of taking a step backwards in a way that doesn't impact like income or compensation or whatever that is. So this path of being like, okay, I'm leaving corporate America and my salary job in order to build out this coaching practice because coaching is what I love to do and build a network around that while knowing that I built my brand as a designer and being able to still do the craft of just being a designer is almost more satisfying to me in a way that I just have to show up, do good work, and not worry about the other politics involved around staffing projects, staffing people, dealing with budgets, dealing with requirements, dealing with people's annual reviews, all this stuff that's just like, yeah, it's a part of the job if you enjoy it. I wanted to lean into the stuff that I enjoyed doing, and that wasn't it. So I
And so,
decided to go like, okay, let me take a contract job as a designer because it pays the bills for now, while I'm able to lean into what I love to do, and that is helping designers level up.
it's interesting that you mentioned about contracting, because I think that is an option going in as a consultant almost. So I've had lots of different conversations with many designers of varying levels, and often contractors feel like their voices may be heard more than internal, because you're being brought in as a specialist, you're being brought in to, I guess, solve a specific problem. So contracting could be a viable route for someone who gets to a point they're not quite sure that leadership's for them, and therefore they still want to work at a higher level, working on
Sure.
strategy, working on. Would you agree?
I think that's a flavor of it. Absolutely. I'm not going to disagree with saying that that's the only way to go, though,
Hmm.
in the sense to where contract now has been adopted in so many ways that when I first heard about it in 2011, 2012 is when I first ever attempted the contract route. I was scared, right? Because you hear about contractors traditionally are like, oh, they're just like plumbers or electricians, and like you got to hire like a contractor to come out and like fix your apartment or your house or wherever you reside. To where learning that professionally, the role of a contractor plays a lot of different parts. So in a lot of the positions that I see, contractors are almost brought in as like a try it before you buy it or like a staff aug setup to where it's like, hey, we don't have headcount to bring on 5 new people because our budget's not there from a corporate standpoint, although the work is there. So we're going to pay contractors to come in and augment our team representative as a W-2 on somebody else's employment or like as an employer on somebody else's books. That's one way to go. That's what I'm currently doing just because it's a way for like me to have a steady income at the moment. The other path of contracting, which I think you're talking about more, is that idea of being hired as like an agency vendor, where that's where I built a lot of my career originally was on the agency side of things to where companies will hire third party consultants or agencies to come in and help improve whatever that might be. That might be a website redesign, that might be building an intranet or a new app to where the internal company doesn't have the chops to do it. So
Yeah.
they hire third party agencies who bring in an entire team to do that work instead.
Yeah.
And that is exactly where, yeah, I've totally come in with like given authority or assumed authority because they're hiring you as the expert versus the job of a contractor where you're just being hired on to play well with others, but you're not on their like employment books in the way
Yeah.
that budgeting might play out. And
There's
sometimes
very much.
people love that too because like you're your own boss and you just kind of jump between contracts if that's what you enjoy. I haven't figured out if that's exactly for me because that sounds a little bit unstable as it might be to like work that constant contract where it is maybe a, a 1 or 2 year deal.
It's interesting. I think you've touched on something beforehand. So, I mean, let's say, for example, you rise through the ranks and you get to a leadership position, and then you decide that leadership's not for you. But by that time, perhaps the salary has increased. Perhaps
Sure.
that the lifestyle has increased to being commensurate with that salary as well. So, what do you think companies like maybe the companies you've worked with before or other companies could do to support senior people, perhaps not looking to go into a leadership or not looking to step down back from a leadership type role, but still being able to support them? Because, like you said, people don't really want to take a step back in terms of their remuneration once they've got used to it.
Sure. I've seen that a handful of times in previous employers where when I was younger and I would see people who never wanted to be a manager and just wanted to keep doing their individual contributor route, younger in my career, I was like, why would you not want to be a manager? Like that seems like society tells us that's what we should be doing, and why aren't you want to do that? Until I became that person and then realized that there's always plenty of work to be done. And the more experience you have, the more difficult projects people can trust you with. So if management is not for you, that's okay. Find the opportunities where they need somebody who's got way more experience to deal with bigger, more complex opportunities at that company. That might be wearing more hats. So if you work at a smaller organization, they might need you to do a little bit more that's not strictly management, but you could still do some like mentoring or guidance or structure. Or a bigger organization, there might be a massive problem that we're like, hey, I trust this person. He's got a lot of experience. We need to put our best players on the biggest projects.
Do you
And
think?
that path still allows you to be attractive and desirable in ways that somebody who might not be at your level can't keep up.
Do you think
Is that
there's
helpful?
a?
Is that
Yeah, no,
sorry, I cut
that's
you off. Is that what you is that helpful?
yeah, totally. I think.
Okay.
Do you think there's a ceiling at which there's a certain point at which I guess when you're so senior or being paid so much, maybe it becomes unviable for companies just to be an IC and not take over leadership of a team?
Probably it'd be hard to say no. I'm not there. I'm not at that caliber. I wish I had that kind of money. I'm not at that caliber by any means. So I wouldn't say that I'm at any sort of threshold that's like, oh yeah, this guy makes X load of
Yeah,
money and then he's just not hireable because nobody wants to pay that salary. I have heard of stories of that to where I think in the beginning of the pandemic, there have been a few extremely successful people who had such a strong brand on their own
yeah,
that the amount of money that they expect to make is something where companies can't justify it. Uh, but in terms of the path of being an IC, it just comes down to the size of the company that you work for. So yes,
yeah.
smaller startups probably don't have the capital as some of the larger institutions to where there's people who work at the thing brands of the world that probably make dumb money as an individual contributor. And I'm not there, and that's not the life that I want to have because it's not work that I would enjoy doing.
I guess the other way to think about it is that it's also about the value that a company puts on user experience
Sure,
as well. So I know some larger companies, they still don't have that larger UX team because they don't place the value in terms of the user experience resource.
sure,
Whereas I know smaller companies, they actually do double down and they invest heavily in user experience because they understand the value it can bring back in terms of the dividends that it can pay. So
absolutely.
it kind of depends on the company, the size, but also how much they value the resource that they have. Um, so in terms of like key skills, let's say for example you're senior practitioner, principal, kind of getting to the verge of leadership, not quite right for you. What skills or what areas of the business do you think are really important for those individuals to really specialize in? Would it be user experience strategy, owning design systems, mentoring? Where do they add the value if they're not going to be leading a team, do you think?
I don't know if there's that's a good question. I don't my instinct is there isn't like a specific formula for them to follow. So a lot of it comes down to continuing to advocate for what you want to do, like the types of projects that you want to do, and allowing your leadership and those who might make those decisions to put you on work to know what you enjoy and what the opportunities might be for you to add value. Where that comes from, you might be working on stuff that nobody else has thought of yet in your organization, to where you might come up with an idea that's saying like, hey, I found this opportunity here. Can I explore that? Or there might be something that kind of passed over at some point and then they're like, oh, we just didn't have the people that we did now, and giving somebody an opportunity to explore that. So it's not this path of being like, oh, if you don't want to be a manager, go this way, as much as it is. And the stuff that I try to work with my clients on is this aspect of leveling up for an individual is unique to them and what they want to do in their career. And being more confident and comfortable with what you want in terms of self awareness and being able to advocate for that so those around you can look out for you is where I would say it's the most helpful. And especially as designers in the UX space and product design has become so broad in nature
Yeah.
that it's like figure out what you want to do. Like if you enjoy being a part of design systems and wanting to create that at scale in a way that goes across a large organization, lean into that, let people know you want to do that. If you want to do strategy and research and ideation on nebulous concepts that don't quite have structure yet, awesome, lean into that and let people know that's what you want to do. Versus this idea of feeling like you are just a number on a team and your boss will pick you automatically to go on to stuff. And that's where people need to realize that they have a voice, they have an opinion, and without advocating for that and asking for it, they won't get it. And that's where that element of just like people can't help you if you don't help yourself. And they only can do that if you are able to know what you want and then ask for it.
So it sounds like communication is probably one of the most important skills. I mean, communication for UX designers, product designers, etc., is really important anyway. But actually, normally that's like outward with your customers or with the users.
Sure.
But actually, communication with your leadership team and your stakeholders and the people around you is equally as important to kind of share what you're hoping to gain, what your goals, ambitions are, so that then they can hopefully help direct you in a path that's
Yeah.
going to be suitable for, because of course it'd be great if every company can just match everyone's ambitions and help everyone to achieve their goals. It's not always going to play into the company's goals and ambitions, so there
Sure.
always has to be a toss up between one and the other. But I guess what you're saying and what you're coaching people on is the clearer you can be with your leadership team, the more likely it is that your goals will hopefully align, so that you can achieve the things that you want to achieve.
You bring up a really interesting point in the sense of like, as designers, we're used to trying to understand our customer, right? So we're trying to build products that our customers enjoy and want to come back to and continue using. Flipping that analogy, which is what I'm doing. So, Career Coach for Designers is an idea of for designers by designers. How do we help us be successful? And using ourselves as the product in the same regard, to where if we are trying to find a job or if we're trying to advocate for ourselves, that aspect of seeing ourselves as the product and being able to understand who are our customers and how do we help our customers help us be successful.
Yeah,
In that regard of like, okay, if our clients, customers pay for a product, we become that product and our clients who pay for us is our compensation, and understanding that people are willing to pay more if they know the value that you're giving them. So as a designer, how do we understand our value and how do we ask for what we want in a way that meets the needs of our customers so they also feel mutually benefited in this exchange? And that might be in your current employer to tell your boss that says like, hey, I'm doing this project, I really don't like it, I would love to see what's happening on maybe this other team or this other idea that you heard of. Or you might look around, which is exactly what I did. I looked around and was like, I don't feel like this is a place where I could be successful anymore. The forecasted work over the next year and a half doesn't excite me. The way that the team was pivoting with new leadership isn't something that I felt like aligned with my personal values and career goals anymore. And I looked for another option. And that comes from the aspect of one, knowing who I am and what I want to do and how I offer that. And two, paying attention to the external variables that I cannot control. And that balance is takes a lot, right? Like there's a lot going on to where a lot of people who are at any stage in their career just feel this society tells me to cash my paycheck. I hate what I do and I'm just stuck. And what I'm trying to do with this career coach for designers is allowing people to feel that they can do exactly what they want to do. Everybody is attractive and interesting and desirable for who they are today, as long as they can tell that story so other people know what they're paying for. And saying yes to the stuff that you enjoy is just as interesting, as important as saying no to the stuff that you don't enjoy so you can stay away from that.
I
Like,
think that's
imagine going to a buffet and eating everything to see what you like, and then going back for the stuff that you're like, yeah, I really hated that one meal. I'm going to eat more of that. You wouldn't do that, right? Like, that's just not what you would do. You would try everything. You'd be like, yeah, I really liked the ribs. I'm going to go back for the ribs. See that as your career. And if you keep showing up to work every day and going back to that plate and eating that meal that you hate, take a look at yourself and figure out what is the meal that you want to go back for, what gets you excited to be like, yeah, I loved this part of my job. How do I tell my leadership and the people who can advocate for me that I want to do more of that part of my job? And if that doesn't exist, believe that it does exist somewhere, and it's
yeah.
not going to come easily all the time.
Well, I
Sorry for
guess
that monologue. I feel like I stole the mic, but hopefully that was like an aha moment for you and the listeners right now.
I'm going to go back for the ribs.
Yeah, let's do it, man. What do you want more of?
All about the ribs.
Always.
But no, I think I think the thing is, like, a lot of people feel like they are so in the projects, they're just in work, and it's hard to switch off, especially with remote working. Everyone's just switched on all the time. There's deliverables and there's deadlines and there's all these external factors at play, which actually makes it difficult for people to carve out the time for themselves to almost do this kind of self-reflection, and also just kind of conducting like the user experience of their career, so
Sure.
start asking themselves, well, what do I want and what are my needs and how can I make sure they're met. Um, so it's almost like everyone just needs to kind of find time, as difficult as it can be when you've got priorities and you've got things going on in the day to day. You need to carve out time to think and analyze, am I where I want to be, am I doing the things I want to do, and if not, what do I need to do and what are the steps I need to take, or who do I need to talk to. And I think you identified something earlier on which is really important, of having people around you or finding people around you that you can trust and speak with, like mentors or friends who can advise in the best way possible.
Absolutely. And as you were saying that, two things came to mind immediately. Number one, I heard this quote a while ago that the quote in summary is busyness is an excuse. And sitting on that, to me, I've never told anybody that I'm busy again, right? It's like, oh, I'm too busy for this. My brain goes to busyness as an excuse, and that marinates in a way to where when you're saying something that you're too busy, you're just telling them that you're not prioritizing them,
Yeah,
right? And like the cliche of when you fly, it's like, oh, assist yourself before assisting others, becomes this element of like, if you feel that you're too busy to focus on yourself, you're choosing to not prioritize that, most likely because it's scary.
yeah,
And it's easier to phone in to what you already know is going to suck than it does to potentially take that pause, schedule the time, prioritize around that time, set boundaries for yourself to make that happen. And that's where coaching for me has allowed me to give that space to other people, and working with clients in a way to where they have that sense of check-in. And they'll come, like, I've had some clients who aren't actually designers, and they come to me because they like my style and my approach, and they're just like, I want to be a part of that journey to go through my own career exploration. And we checked in, or we still do check in regularly to be like, okay, where are you at right now? What do you enjoy? What do you not enjoy? Let's keep kind of tasting that buffet until you figure out what you really like. You love that analogy too. We go back for ribs all day long, Ryan. So like paying
I'm a
attention to
foodie,
that,
so yeah.
figuring what's that?
I'm a foodie. I love good food.
Dry rub or sauce?
It's both.
If you had to pick one.
Sauce. The
Oh,
messier,
really?
the
That's the English inside you. Dry rub is so good, man. You put those spices together. Anyway, we could nerd out about that for a while too. I don't think that's what people want to listen to, though.
We'll
We got to
find
pay
out. It
attention to
could
what our
be a
customers are
sideline.
dialing in for.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So
so that part
yeah,
about like business as an excuse was the thing in my mind, and then the second one is just like, yeah, there's a concept of we are the average of the five people that we hang out with the most. So who do you consider to be those five people, and is it the lifestyle that you want for yourself? And looking around, like I imagine some of those people are people that you work with regularly. And do you love the boss that you work with? Do you like the team that you're on? Are you in a space where you're like, this pays well and I need the income? It's just not enjoyable. And there's a time and place for all of that. Like there's the concept of um, you're either learning or you're earning. If you're
yeah,
not doing either, you should leave. And if you're able to do both, it's even better,
yeah.
right? So are you learning on the job or are you earning on the job? If you could do both, that's kind of the ideal. If you're not doing either, take a look at yourself and take a step back just to leap 2 steps or 3 steps forward, especially with how hot the market is and being able to be like, yeah, I'm freaking awesome and I need to get out of here.
So I had a situation earlier which kind of plays into this, where someone called me for advice, and they are at the position of just going into management leadership, um, but they don't feel actually their salary is commensurate to where they should be. So they're trying to think about the best way of being able to approach their leadership team.
Sure.
Uh, but that kind of brings about lots of feelings of nervousness, anxiousness, because we don't often like talking about money and difficult conversations
Sure.
when it comes to our jobs. Any advice for people who might be in similar situations? Because there's probably loads of them out there where they're kind of having these real crunch time talks, but they don't necessarily like that, the anxiousness that kind of speaking about topics brings.
Sure. There's a lot of different ways to go about that, and everybody has their own comfort level. A few things to keep in mind is this idea of value-based pricing. So if we see ourselves as the product that people are paying for, what type of value do we bring to that organization, and are we being priced accordingly for that? And it's really weird to think about ourselves as a tangible good. Realizing that, another quote that sticks with me is the idea of everybody is replaceable. So if you realize that you are replaceable
Yeah,
and the next person who could potentially come in is going to get paid what you feel your value-based pricing is, then the company is going to stick with you because they're getting a good deal, which you don't ever want to be that. You don't want to be the dollar store, right? Like that's not the style that you want to live for yourself. So that value-based pricing of taking a step back, doing your homework to really know what you're worth and paying attention to a number of sites out there that give you a chance to figure out what your value is. And if your current employer isn't able to pay you that value, what are you getting from that exchange? Going back to, are you earning or are you learning? If it's a chance where if it's your first management job and you're like, all right, I'm going to do this for a year. I know I'm not getting paid as much. However, that experience that I'm learning will allow me to earn tomorrow, right? It's like what you're doing today is hopefully beneficial to where you want to take your career. And when I was in that interim director role most recently, I didn't get paid more. I was filling in a spot because I stepped up and wanted to learn it. And then once they hired the actual person to take that position, whew, hated every bit of it. And I was so glad to give it up, right? Like it was a chance for me to learn. And I didn't enjoy it at all. Like at all would be a false statement. There was a percentage of it that I enjoyed and I don't regret
yeah.
it at all. However, it's not what I want to be doing. So it was a chance for me to learn without earn. And if this person is getting promoted and there's a conversation in that promotion, you should say, great, what is the value that this brings to the company and how am I being compensated to accommodate that? I would say I kind of hinted to it a little bit throughout this conversation. To summarize it all, the idea for me was I've learned in the path of not only building my craft as a designer on the side, I've been involved with a lot of different programs. I taught a UX certification program. I've kind of spoken at different, or I have spoken at different conferences internationally. And I've known that that was a part that I've really enjoyed. And the more conversations I had with people in the space who did pursue some level of guidance or help or the career services that are offered through these bootcamp programs are usually done from people who don't actually have experience in the field. So imagine somebody who you're trying to go to for career help doesn't actually understand the career that you're trying to go down, and then you feel stuck. So what I'm able to provide is, because I've built my career as a designer, that aspect of a designer by trade and a coach at heart allows me to use the knowledge that I have through industry experience and help add clarity to designers who are trying to find their path. And by default, most people are like, oh, that just means that you help a lot of junior designers. That's not true. Unfortunately, in the space right now, there are so many people who have been doing design at all different levels that I even have a client who's 10 years away for retirement, has worked at the same job for 15 years. So she just hasn't needed to make sure that her LinkedIn is good. She just hasn't needed to make sure that she has a portfolio. She just doesn't know how to tell her story because she hasn't needed to. So that aspect of like, what is your story and where do you want to go as a designer is how we then tell your story to pursue that path for you. So using the design process on ourselves, because that's what I know, that treating ourselves as a product is like, let's go through that discovery of what do you want to do and let's define who you are. Similar to the research phase, you're going to go out and figure out what your customer needs are, and then you're going to figure out what that maybe user journey or sitemap might need to be to tell that story. So by using the design practice of ourselves as the product, we're able to figure that out in a low fidelity format that then allows us to make sure that we tell that story correctly in a way that is like, cool, let's design your brand based off of what path you want to go down. And what I'm able to provide to designers is I understand the different options that might be available to them to help them figure out what they do or don't want to do, versus traditional career coaches might be like, oh, this is what your resume is supposed to include, even though the resume doesn't tell the right story
Yeah.
because they don't know what story needs to be told.
But I think but it's true. I think if you have someone who hasn't necessarily had experience within industry to therefore
Sure.
know what the potential solutions will be. But I think, yeah, by diving down, summarizing, and then understanding, actually you can provide really useful guidance for people that actually really need it. But I think, like you said, even if someone wanted to do a bit of self-reflection, they probably just need to talk to someone or maybe just ask themselves those questions, sometimes quite hard questions about what do they really want, what really motivates them, what do they want to be doing more of, and then they need to be considering how they communicate that back to their wider team, to
Sure.
see if that's something that company can offer them, or to see if they might need to look elsewhere into somewhere else that can.
And being so confident in what it is that you do or don't want to do comes across as so much more attractive for an employer. Another analogy that's not related to a buffet for you on this one is the concept of like, if you're hanging out with a bunch of friends and you're like, oh yeah, cool, I like listening to music also. That's okay. Like, good. A lot of people like listening to music. Just saying like, yeah, I'm a designer too, isn't interesting.
Yeah,
Versus if you say like a specific genre of music that you like or a specific artist that you like, then it becomes a more interesting conversation for your friends to be like, oh yeah, I really like that person, or like, you like him, I hate that guy. Like, it makes for an interesting dialogue versus being like, oh yeah, I want to be a designer also.
yeah.
Versus, oh yeah, I really like design systems. I'm really passionate about design systems. Let's talk about that. And like, oh, I don't really like doing the research part of things. It's like, okay, how do you work with researchers to complement the skills that you don't have or want to flex?
And I
Um,
think as well, just to add on to that point, like explaining why you love that artist or why you love doing those things adds so much more context than just saying, I really love X.
yeah,
Like, brilliant. Was, so do I. But, being able to explain why you really love that thing, suddenly, actually, if you really love it, you become more animated, become more interested, more excited.
sure.
I think that's what helps drive that whole excitement and enthusiasm behind what it is you're trying to do. But you probably need someone asking you what it is you love doing, to be
Yeah.
able to kind of get to that point. So you don't go through this typical kind of run of the mill, yeah, I guess getting stuck in that kind of hamster wheel, going and going and going without ever stopping and thinking about it.
I would say there's also that balance of needing a safe space to do that, right? So
Yeah,
if you have somebody who might be feeling like they might be like the sole breadwinner of their family and they have to provide the income is what keeps food on the table. So there's that maybe that obligation of like they have to put themselves secondary in order to support the greater good of their family. So are you, right? Like if
yeah,
that is your situation, so are you, and being able to know that it's okay in creating that safe space, whether if that is hiring a career coach or finding a buddy that you can just go commiserate with for a little bit to give you that sense of empowerment that's like, yeah, I can do this, I am worth it, and I don't know what I want yet. And that's some of the most rewarding journey to go down. Yes, it's scary, and people don't want to because it's easier to not. And being able to, whether if it's what I'm doing or there's other people that you feel comfortable with, having an element of support to where you can embrace who you really are
Yeah.
and figure that out is awesome and fun and scary, and something that we're all just trying to explore life in a journey that, as long as you're not causing harm to yourself or others, try it. Try that
Keep
buffet
going.
again. Try the ribs. It might taste good the third time, but if you eat four of them, you might hate yourself, and that's okay. You learned.
You've learned enough is enough.
Yeah.
Well, look, Stephen, thank you so much for joining me. I hope other designers will find this as inspiring as I have, and look forward to others joining me on the UX Playbook for future episodes. Appreciate your
Yeah.
time.
Awesome. Thank you, Ryan, so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. I'm excited about it.